As I've mentioned before, if you spent any time trying to find information about separation anxiety, you've probably encountered a lot of conflicting information and advice. Everyone from social media dog trainers to friends and family seem to have an opinion about how to best help your dog. But the problem is, how do you decide who to listen to and who is actually right? So we are going to go through some common myths when it comes to separation anxiety and why they aren't correct. The information I'm about to give you has been collected from peer-reviewed research, carefully collected data, and collated information from the hundreds of CSATs across the world and their thousands of clients. So let's start with the first and my least favorite myth, which is that you caused your dog separation anxiety. Separation anxiety is one of those behaviors and issues in dogs that's actually been studied really thoroughly. And the truth is, we don't really know what causes separation anxiety. Most likely because it probably has a lot of different sources and contributing factors to its development. That said, we have ruled out several factors that we know do not cause separation anxiety, and owner behavior is one of them. Regardless of whether you let your dog sleep in the bed, share your food with them, give them lots of affection, coddle, spoil them, treat them like a family member, none of those activities have been linked to the development of separation anxiety problems. And since even researchers haven't been able to determine a single causal factor for separation anxiety, it's not likely that someone without a complete picture of you and your dog is going to be able to tell you that it is your fault. So, if you have been carrying guilt, feeling like you caused this issue in your dog, I would implore you to let that go. Sometimes you can do everything right and still run into these issues, so it is not your fault. Myth number 2 is very similar. It is that affection or too much affection causes or worsens separation anxiety. Now, this is very similar to myth 1, but I gave it its own spot because a lot of people will not only say that affection causes separation anxiety, but that you should withhold affection if you want to fix it. But as we've established, there is no evidence linking affection to the development of separation anxiety. And so if too much affection did not cause it, withholding affection will not fix it. I promise you that lots of people see plenty of success with separation anxiety training while still loving and being affectionate toward their dogs as much as they want to. Myth number 3 is a really common one, and that is that you should crate train a dog with separation anxiety. This is an idea that makes a lot of sense on the surface because you're creating a safe place for your dog, ideally that should have positive associations where your dog can't get into anything or hurt themselves. Unfortunately, a lot of dogs who have separation anxiety also experience confinement anxiety, meaning being enclosed in that small space can actually make their anxiety worse. It's all well and good to have that small, quiet space that your dog can retreat to if that is where they feel the most safe. But closing them in there and removing that element of choice usually does more harm than good. It's sort of like if you were feeling physically uncomfortable, maybe a little worried, maybe a little anxious, you probably wouldn't choose to be in a crowded elevator. And although it makes a lot of sense to gravitate towards crates as a way to prevent your dog from causing harm to your home or even harm to themselves, a lot of dogs, when crated, will attempt to escape the crate and can really hurt themselves doing so. Some dogs, even if they don't attempt to escape, may resort to self-harm behaviors. When we're going through this training process, I recommend giving your dog as much space as you safely can. And remember, at the beginning of this process, we are going to be watching them every step of the way so we can intervene if something unsafe does occur. There may be places in your home that you just don't want your dog to have access to, but I would try to think in terms of closing your dog out of spaces rather than closing them into a space. If you have a puppy or a new dog who just doesn't know how to live in your home yet, I would recommend a playpen, maybe with an open crate available to them. Alternatively, you could also try a puppy-proofed room. If this is an avenue you decide to go down, your dog should be comfortable in this space for 30 minutes with company before we start the separation training. I think it's best if we consider confinement training and separation training as completely separate skills. But it is much more likely that you will see success in your training if you ditch confinement and give your dog as much space as you can. Myth number 4 is that food toys help separation anxiety. This can be a little bit of a tricky one because it actually does seem to work for a lot of dogs when you start using it. But ultimately, food toys tend to be a distraction. They aren't powerful enough to really change your dog's underlying emotions. They do engage your dog in behaviors that isn't barking, pacing, panting, or destroying your home, and so it may appear that the food is working. But this can really muddy the waters in terms of how long your dog actually is comfortable being alone. Because can your dog really do 30 minutes? Or can they only do the 30 seconds between finishing the toy and realizing you aren't there? Furthermore, a lot of dogs can continue to panic while they eat the food, and a lot of dogs will just refuse food when they're alone regardless. In order to get a fully accurate read of how our dog is really feeling and really coping with alone time, it's better if we just skip the food toys for now. Myth number 5 is that you should not come back if your dog is crying. We tend to think of all forms of dog training in terms of whether we are reinforcing or punishing the right or wrong behavior. But the truth is, there is a lot more to dog training than just rewarding and punishing. Ultimately, we need to consider the function of the behavior. Your dog is crying because they feel unsafe and they feel anxious and insecure. Providing support, comfort, and your presence is not going to increase those feelings of insecurity and anxiety. Therefore, it's not going to increase the behavior. Our goal at all times should be creating feelings of safety, comfort, and security because that is what is going to create lasting change in our dogs. If they feel supported by you, their barking and anxious behaviors will not increase. Myth number 6 is that your dog has separation anxiety because you're a poor leader. This is a myth that is based in dominance theory, the idea that your dog has a concept of leadership and they are trying to control you, control the household, and be top of the pack. The idea behind poor leadership causing separation anxiety is that if your dog doesn't see you as a leader, they will try to fill that role. And if they can't see you, they can't control you, and that makes them anxious. First of all, we need to establish that we can't ever really know what is going on in a dog's mind. So any claims for separation anxiety that revolve around what the dog is thinking and feeling rather than on observable behaviors is probably not based in fact, especially when it comes to abstract labels and human concepts like leadership. Second, dominance theory and alpha theory have been debunked. It's actually thoroughly established in the research that dogs have no concept of leadership, there is no such thing as an alpha dog, and dominance really isn't as significant in dog relationships as some might have you believe. So if you hear any advice regarding dominance, alphas, or leadership, especially when it comes to separation anxiety, you can probably write it off. Myth number 7 is that getting a second dog will cure your dog's separation anxiety. Unfortunately, separation anxiety and isolation distress are issues that tend to be very focused around human company. It is the lack of human company that causes the anxiety, and so the presence of other animals, species, usually doesn't make much of a difference. It is perfectly fine to add a second dog in your home if that is something that is already in your plans and in your goals. If you just want another family member in your house and you are ready for the responsibilities that come along with that, by all means go for it. But I would not ever recommend getting a dog for the sole purpose of helping your current dog overcome a behavioral issue. Plus, you do run the risk of ending up with 2 dogs with separation anxiety. Myth number 8 is that exercise and mental stimulation will fix your dog's separation anxiety. Now, I want to say that it is absolutely important to meet our dog's mental, physical, and behavioral needs. If you think about us humans, we are not our best selves when our needs aren't met. If we're lacking in sleep, social activity, if we're hungry, we're not going to be in the best place to deal with stress or take in new information. The same holds true for our dogs, and there is evidence to suggest that more exercise does help dogs cope with separation anxiety better. That said, separation anxiety is a panic disorder. You cannot exercise away fear, and it's not exactly sustainable either to have to absolutely exhaust your dog every time you want to leave the house. Making sure that our dogs get enough exercise and enough enrichment is a vital part to any behavior modification plan, but it should not be what our entire plan hinges on. Myth number 9 is that you shouldn't let dogs with separation anxiety on the furniture or sleep with you in bed. This is another myth that harks back to dominance theory. The idea is that if the dog is on the same physical level as you, they will think they're equal and therefore in charge. As we've established, dominance theory is dead and debunked, so we don't need to pay attention to these silly myths. And myth number 10 is that teaching a dog to stay on their bed will help with separation anxiety. This is a strategy that tends to have limited success. You may be able to successfully get your dog to stay on their bed for 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes, but it's probably unlikely that they will be willing to stay on their bed waiting for a single treat for 2, 3, or 4 hours. And ultimately, we don't need our dogs to be glued to the bed. We just need them to not be panicking. It is normal and natural for our dogs to shift and move around during the day. Did you know that dogs even move around as a means of temperature regulation when they're resting? So really, it's okay for them to move around. It's okay for them to even look out the window. We just need them to not be distressed. Those are 10 big myths for separation anxiety. I'm sure there are many more, and please feel free to list pieces of advice that you may have been given or heard in the group, and we can go over whether there's any truth to them. Like I've said, anything that I've stated here can be backed by peer-reviewed research or data collected by hundreds of CSATs across the world.